So the railroad didn't just build Texas. The railroad built a version of Texas, and that version of Texas kind of moved on. So I want you to think about this as we talk about this. The railroads gave us the Texas towns, and the car and the plane gave us the modern Texas that's often bypassing these Texas towns. Now, I know that may sound a little strange to some of you, but the railroad played a very vital role in Texas's growth. I mean, it gave us new trade corridors for things like cattle, for cotton, for oil and gas to get this stuff to market over the years, right? And it even moved our people from one side of the state to the other side of the state. Railroad played a huge role in Texas. When we had the San Antonio to Port Aransas line, we had one, lot. Did you ever hear of Lot, Texas, right up the road here from Waco? Did you ever hear of Lot? Well, that was founded, named after, I should say, by a guy, Uriah Lott, who was very instrumental in the railroad here in Texas. And it seems like as we've gotten further into this, the railroads have died, Texas has changed, but there's a deep legacy for this thing called railroad here in Texas. I want you to think back to the 1850s, a time when just before the Civil War out east and America got drug into all that, Texas kind of got drug into all that. I want you to think about the empty miles, the vast miles of the great state of Texas in the American West. Texas had a lot to offer. Texas had a lot of room to expand during the 1850s. And railroad helped us do that. Railroad helped us get a lot of things to market. It helped us create, when we were still our own country, it helped us kind of create some of our own trade corridors. Railroad was a very interesting part of Texas. And it helped us close the mile gap. Because as big as Texas was, people like Uriah Lott helped us a lot. From the 1870s to the 1890s, we'd pretty much in the 1850s figured out how to close the miles. But what it did in the 1870s and the 1890s, all the way up to this point, was it helped us create trade corridors with things like cattle, cotton, corn, things that we were trying to get to other places. Railroad was a practical way to make trade connections with places like Mexico and to get things back east. But part of railroads' problem back then was railroads. And I think railroads have always been partly railroads' own worst enemy. Now, in Texas, we don't see much of the railroad crossing the miles today. And we're going to get into that a little bit too here in a minute. But I want you to think about this. Railroad was instrumental in helping Texas get products to market. And that means something. Because if you can't get your products to market, you know this, you're a business person, you're a regular old guy like I am. If you can't get your products to market, what good are your products? Now we're kind of seeing that today where railroad was its own worst enemy. Tech is kind of its own worst enemy too. And there's a lesson to be learned there. If you can get your product to market, but you're not able to really get that product seen or get that product noticed or whatever, and you're not able to work responsibly and everybody's just trying to make a little money off everybody else, it creates a downfall. And after the 1890s into the 1900s, we kind of started seeing that happen with the railroads. Now, because we had figured out how to gap the miles and how to get some of our products to market, in the 1900s to 1930s, places like South Texas, West Texas, and the Panhandle began to fill in, partly because of railroads. They had new ways to get their stuff to market. They had new ways to get people there. The railroads were helping. And throughout the 1900s and all the way up until the 1930s, Texas railroads were helping build this state. And that distinction matters. That's important because if you can't connect your people in better ways, quicker, faster, stronger, then people are going to leave and they're going to go elsewhere and or they're going to find new solutions. And while oil and gas was changing the face of railroads, what was being carried on railroads, from the 1900s to the 1930s, previously it was cotton, it was cattle, it was stuff like that. By the 1900s and the 1930s, it was a lot of oil and gas and still a lot of people. And so that's where it began to change how we got some of our key commodities to market. But then the 1930s to the 1950s rolled around, and trains were still a big part of the way that Texans got around this state. This is a big old state, okay? People were using trains to some extent to still get around. But then, as interstates and highways began to be developed, and they began to bypass some of these rail towns, a different Texas began emerging. And Texas again changed. You see what I'm saying here? Texas has changed a lot over the years. And we've changed because our industry has changed. Our philosophies have changed. Change is inevitable. And sometimes we have to change with that technology or we're going to end up like the railroads. So, as the railroad towns popped up, so the railroad towns began to go away as the interstates and the highways began to come through the new places in the 1950s. Americans and Texans loved their cars. We began buying more cars and we could find that we could move up and down the roads a lot quicker, a lot easier, and a lot cheaper back then. Even today, it's cheaper than traveling by train's expensive. And sometimes traveling by car is quicker and cheaper. So again, railroad became its own demise between the 30s and 50s. And there's a lesson to be learned from that too. If you're in business, adapt, improvise, and overcome, and don't become your own demise. And that takes us to the 80s. Well, so the 50s and 70s, we saw a lot of plane travel, right? So Southwest Airlines, and this is not sponsored by Southwest, but Southwest began to connect places like Dallas and Lubbock, Dallas and San Antonio, Dallas and Corpus. Dallas was kind of the money center. Midland, Lubbock, places like that where the work happened at. Southwest, kind of Herb Kelleher and all them, kind of bridge that gap. Okay. And then the other airlines caught on to it. You had a lot of other airlines kind of pop up in this 50s to 70s to 80s kind of range. Planes change things. So we could stay. Look, back in the day, you could fly pretty easily without a lot of paperwork, without a lot of headache, without a lot of money from, say, Dallas to Lubbock and then fly home in the evening. You could do that. That worked. But now it's not so cheap and it's not so easy. So as trains began to die, the planes kind of replaced the way that we got around Texas. But now, like I say, planes are not quite as easy. You got to drive the airport. Plane tickets are expensive. Nobody wants to deal with this real ID and this checking and all this other stuff. 9/11 changed a lot of that. The Patriot Act changed a lot of how we have to live here because the politicians got scared. Think about this, okay? Flying is not as practical as it used to be. But Texas still doesn't have access to high-speed rail. And I knew you people were going to say, here he is. He's a high-speed rail guy. He's going to take our land for high-speed rail. I just see it coming. He's going to take our land. Well, I'm sorry, but if it means Texans can move around a lot quicker, a lot cheaper, they can commute from Dallas to San Antonio or Dallas to Houston pretty reasonably. Leave in the morning, go to work at a hospital in Dallas, go to work at a bank in Houston, go to work at a office in Houston. You can be there in an hour, hour and a half. and you can do it for a few bucks, I'm all for it. Because again, Texas changes. And you follow me? That's where and that's how we change. That's how we become something different. We have to look for innovative solutions to move people cheaply, move people efficiently, move people practically. And when we saw our railroads die because of the automobile and the plane, we adapted to new things. Eminent domain came through and took people's land for roads and for highways. I'm sure they complained about that too, but that's just the way it is. Sometimes you got to lose something for the greater good. And politicians don't want to talk about this. Politicians want to sit there and talk about all this, your rights as a landowner, your rights as this, your rights as that. You do have some rights. But those rights, you have to ask yourself, just because it's yours doesn't necessarily mean it's best for everybody else. And that's a hard pill to swallow. So you see, as simple as I am, I'm a pretty controversial kind of guy because what I'm telling you is a very controversial thing. You see, Texas has changed a lot over the years. And Texas has had industries die over the years because we failed to adapt. And we've had mindsets that have often collapsed under our own pressure. Well, are we there again? So as Texas continues to expand, as Texas continues to grow, maybe going back to an older solution that's cheaper, faster, more efficient might not be a bad way. I mean, if let's just say you're a state rep or something living down in Corpus and you need to get up to Austin. Instead of driving up there or flying up there, wouldn't you like to just hop on board a train and just an hour you're in Austin? Of course you would. And it not cost you an arm and a leg? Of course you would. People want to move. And people want to move quick. And people want to move cheap. Planes can't do that anymore. Cars can't do that anymore. People are also tired of being restricted. Movement that's affordable and less restrictive is how things get done. So free them up. Give people their freedom. Give people their options to move. Railroad was a huge part of that in Texas. Maybe we should look at how we build some high-speed rail in Texas. It's worth a conversation. So, hey, idiot. My name's Matt. Hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it's given you something to think about. Please be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share. And sure, if it's been a little controversial, I hope it has rubbed you the wrong way. Because rubbing you the wrong way, that's how I get your attention. And that's how we make people think. Sometimes. Sometimes we just have a little fun. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share. I'd love to have a conversation with you. Take care.